It's been several years since we've seen headlines like this. Long-term care residents beg to go outside after year-long COVID-19 confinement. Or Justin Trudeau at a very public gathering to protest police brutality in another country, while Canadians could face large fines for having a simple backyard barbecue with family and friends. Now, some Canadians are willing to put this fever dream in the rearview mirror and just forget about it, like it never happened. But others are not willing to do so until certain people are held accountable. And one Conservative MP from Kitchener is doing just that. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to episode 58 of Jonny Says So. Last week, Conservative MP from Kitchener, Ontario, Matt Strauss went viral. In his maiden address to the House of Commons, he absolutely blasted the years of COVID insanity in this country and the policies of Justin Trudeau, Mark Carney, and Chrystia Freeland, which he described as full communism. Now, this story was not touched by the legacy media, but it was all over Twitter and Reddit, with people on the right praising him for his courage in speaking out against this, and people on the left criticizing him for his use of the word communism. Now, I will say that maybe totalitarianism or authoritarianism might have been better words to describe what happened in this country. You don't want to give the left any ammo to be like, actually, it wasn't full communism. But either way, I think his words are spot on, and I want to play the entire thing for you in its entirety, because once you listen to his lived experience, you might be more inclined to agree with his assessment of full communism. So let's get into it.
Resuming debate, please the débat, the member for Kitchener South Hespeler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful to the people of my hometown of Kitchener South Hespeler who give me this opportunity to make a maiden speech today in Canada's House of Commons. May I never forget that this is their seat, and may I faithfully serve them so long as they see fit to keep me in it. Mr. Speaker, there is no chance I could stand before you today without the love and support of my wife, Simone. She is a brilliant physician and scientist who has now given me the greatest possible gifts, our children Penelope and Felix. 6 months before this election, she nearly died delivering Felix to us. She spent a couple days in the ICU on life support, and today is at home in Hespeler, being just the best mom in the world to our 2 kids. I should be at home with them. They are the best part of my life. Also, it has been a pleasure and an honor to be a physician serving my community for the last 13 years. So when I went outdoor knocking and I knocked on thousands of doors, one of the most common questions I received was a question I asked myself. Why the heck am I doing this? Why would I go into politics? Don't I like being a doctor, and don't we need doctors? The answer is yes, I like being a doctor, and yes, we need doctors. But to fully explain why I had to do this will take about 10 minutes. It has to do with who I am and what Kitchener is, so here we go. Mr. Speaker, my family story is typical in Kitchener. My dad's family came to the region when it was still called Berlin, Ontario. They came from present-day Germany before it was called Germany. 100 years later, when war with Germany broke out, my grandpa Strauss, like so many other Kitchener Germans, enlisted with the Scots Fusiliers. Because your last name and your mother tongue is not of much matter when it was time to stand on guard for our true north, strong and free. We only have a Canada today because Canadians from all over the world put Canada first in this way. They stake their lives for Canadian values, which are enshrined in our anthem as truth, strength and freedom. Conversely, my mom came as a Romanian refugee from communist Yugoslavia in the 1960s. When my dad was away with the Air Force, we'd speak Romanian in the house. I grew up hearing from my grandparents in that language that they were poor back home. But I had no idea how poor until about 10 years ago. I traveled with my grandfather to his tiny village, now on the border between Serbia and Romania. Fully half the homes there are boarded up. It is overrun by stray dogs and weeds. We went to the house my mom was born in. It had 2 rooms, dirt floors, about 400 square feet. There was a bedroom with 4 beds in it and a kitchen with 2 beds in it. 9 people slept in those 6 beds. As I stood in what I'm sorry to call a shack, the enormity of what Canada had given my family hit me like a ton of bricks. My grandfather is one of the smartest, hardworking people I've ever met. But when he came to Canada, he spoke 0 English, he had a grade 6 education and 2 small daughters with him. After 6 months of working in a factory for $1.09 an hour, he was able to buy a 5-bedroom house in downtown Kitchener for $20,000. That house is now worth $1 million. Mr. Speaker, I don't have to tell you that that opportunity no longer exists in our country today. My 28-year-old brother-in-law recently graduated from the University of Waterloo for mechatronics engineering. He has no hope of buying that house on his engineer salary. Where did that opportunity go? I do believe that my grandfather has the answer to that question. He always he had to do 3 years of mandatory military service in Yugoslavia, and he always told me that he loved the army life. It didn't strike me until a couple years ago to sit down and ask him if he loved the army so much, why did he go back to farming in the village? Because, Matthew, you cannot get promoted unless you join the party, that is the Communist Party. Well, then you were an ambitious man, grandfather. Why didn't you join the party? Because, Matthew, if you are in the party and they say this is black, he was pointing at his white tablecloth, then you have to say it is black, even though it is white. English is my grandfather's fifth language. I promise he has never read George Orwell's 1984. But this is exactly the 2 + 2 = 5 scene. I think about this scene a lot when I am told that men can get pregnant. When the truth becomes illegal, everything breaks. If you can't say what's wrong with the tractor, or the levy, or the hospital, or the passport office, you can never fix it, and it will stay broken.
Now, I find it very interesting that he brings this point up, because you might recall during the election campaign that this was a very common tactic and talking point of the Liberals. They would criticize the Conservatives as somehow being unpatriotic every time that they brought up anything that was seemingly broken in this country, whether it be healthcare, infrastructure, housing, the cost of living, you name it. Any sort of insinuation that anything was wrong in this country was just unpatriotic. It's a common tactic of these people, and he's calling it out, rightfully so.
Broken. So not willing to give up on speaking the truth, my grandfather went back to the village. After a few years, though, the farms were all socialized, and eventually the starvation got so bad they had to make a break for it. Now, I have stories of our healthcare system and universities going back 13 years ago and going up all the way to last fall, when my bleeding postpartum wife spent 6 hours cradling a 2-day-old baby in the emergency room while not being seen by a physician. When I told the triage nurse I was going to take my wife to another hospital in the next town over, he said, "That would be great, thank you. There is no place for her here." If you go to one of our ERs and get treated like cattle, like my wife was at that time, you have no recourse. They would be really delighted if you took your business elsewhere.
Now, let me know what you think in the comments if this is a common experience for you, if you've been unfortunate enough to rely on one of our emergency rooms or walk-in clinics in the last few years. I'd like to know.
When farming is socialized, you get bread lines, and people died of starvation while standing in Soviet bread lines. When healthcare is socialized, you get lines in the and I promise you, people have died and are dying in waiting rooms, in emergency rooms across this country right
true.
now. You might think that I'm being overwrought and seeing the ghost of communism where it does not exist. However, I would note that we just spent 10 years with a prime minister who, when asked which government in the world he most admired, stated the basic dictatorship of the Communist Chinese Party. A prime minister who released a statement lionizing brutal communist dictator Fidel Castro when he died. A prime minister whose answer to every social problem, dental care, child care, pharmacare, school lunch, climate change, what have you, was always more socialism, more central planning, more top-down pronouncements, less freedom to make choices for yourself and your family. The zenith of all this top-down control came during the pandemic. The members opposite went full communism. They locked Canadians down in their homes. They ruined weddings, funerals, Easters, proms, and Christmases. They closed the borders. They kept mothers from children and brothers from sisters. They deprived this house of its ancient rights. They spent $600 billion of taxpayer money with no budget, doubled our national debt to pay healthy 16-year-olds to sit in their basement.
Now, all of this is objectively true. These are not conspiracy theories. These are all things that happened. Things that most Canadians, for whatever reason, were willing to turn a blind eye to. Never mind in this election, but a lot of this was obvious in 2021 when Justin Trudeau was reelected. But many people in this country were still drinking the Kool-Aid at that point. And to me, it's unbelievable that we are going to let all of this slide by. I mean, guys, what is the point of having a Charter of Rights and Freedoms if, when it is violated, absolutely nothing happens? Man, I'm so glad he's saying all this stuff. He's absolutely spot on, particularly about paying healthy 16-year-olds to stay in their basement. Spot on.
Then, as now, they did all this in the name of crisis management. Physicians, professors, and journalists who spoke out against these abuses were hunted down. They had their licenses and their jobs threatened. I know this because it happened to me. At Queen's University, where I taught, Jane Philpott herself, one of the only 2 cabinet ministers to speak truth to Justin Trudeau's power, informed me in her dean's office that the reason the administration had to harass me was that I criticized the government. That is a direct quote. Of course, the Prime Minister and his commissars were immune from all of this. He could attend gatherings of greater than 5 if it suited his political purposes, like a George Floyd protest in Ottawa, and he did. Mr. Speaker, the Liberals claimed onto them.
That is spot on. The George Floyd protest is a very interesting one because at that time, most Canadians were under some very, very draconian restrictions. You weren't allowed to have a kid's birthday party. You weren't allowed to invite the neighbors over for a large, never mind a large barbecue. Like, you weren't allowed to have several families mingling together. And yet it was somehow okay to have a massive protest against police brutality in another country. The hypocrisy is astounding, and it wasn't just Justin Trudeau. Many of our health ministers were roped up in this as well. Rules for thee and not for me.
Themselves the power to censor the news, to violate free speech in the name of fighting misinformation, while they themselves promoted misinformation. They gave luxurious contracts to their friends in academia to promote their misinformation. They gave hundreds of millions of dollars to mainstream media to promote government narratives. These three institutions, government, media, and the academy, have important roles in society to regulate each other. But under the federal government's bribery scheme, they have ended up, like the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker, out to sea, stewing in each other's bathwater. When ordinary, everyday Canadians came here to Ottawa complaining that their charter rights to bodily autonomy, assembly, and free movement were being violated, every member of the Liberal caucus voted to trample their rights further. They violated Section 2 and Section 8 of the Charter in imposing the Emergencies Measures Act. It is not me saying that, but Justice Mosley of the Federal Court. They trampled on the charter rights they claimed to revere, and then they laughed about it. The current Minister of Transport, in particular, laughed about it, Mr. Speaker. If we cannot speak truth to their power, everything will continue to break. And that is why I had to come here, Mr. Speaker. I refuse to be a cog in their broken machine. I hope it is the case that this darkness left with the former Prime Minister, and I beseech the new Prime Minister to turn to the light.
Spoiler alert, it hasn't.
To defend those values enshrined in our anthem, truth, strength, and freedom. I read his book, Mr. Speaker. The book was called Values, and freedom, I'm sorry to say, is not among those therein discussed. The repackaging of their socialist plans in bankers' socks might fool some of the people some of the time, but I will tell you who it is not fooling. It is not fooling the multicultural communities in Kitchener South Hespeler, the Romanians, Albanians, Polish, Ukrainians, Serbians, Croatians, Lithuanians, Venezuelans, Chinese, Somalis, and Ethiopians with lived experience of socialism who know what they are seeing and don't like it and sent me here.
Boom. There it is. He hits the nail on the head there, guys. A perfect analogy to this is look at Florida, for instance. You have a large Cuban population in Florida, and they mostly vote Republican because they don't like anything that resembles the communism that they fled. And the same thing happens here in Canada.
They came here for freedom, not just any freedom, but our specific embodied Canadian freedoms. These freedoms are ours, but they are not merely ours, and they are certainly not ours to discard. They were fought for at Runnymede and encoded in the Magna Carta. They were fought for in the English Civil Wars, the Glorious Revolution, and enshrined in the Declaration of Right. They were fought for in the World Wars and enacted in Diefenbaker's Bill of Rights. They were fought for by both my grandfathers, by all of our grandparents, and embodied in all of us here. So the answer to the question of why I came here, I'm here to speak truth to power on behalf of the people of Kitchener South Hespeler. I will be happy to go back to being a physician and professor once I can practice in truth and freedom again, once we can all live in truth and freedom again. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and may God keep our land glorious and free.
Now, in my opinion, this was more inspiring, thought-provoking, and real than anything I've ever heard come out of Justin Trudeau, Chrystia Freeland, Mark Carney, or any of these guys. In fact, I'd go out on a limb and say that this was better than anything Pierre Poilievre has had to say in a long time. Now, I think it's safe to say that Pierre Poilievre's position as leader of the opposition is pretty safe. I mean, if the knives aren't out for him at this point, I think it's a safe bet that he's going to remain leader of the opposition, provided he wins that by-election. But if it were to go a different way, I'm now comfortable that there might be some other options out there for a strong opposition going forward. And that's my show for today, guys. Let me know what you think down in the comments. What did you think of the speech? And do you think that it's fair to describe the COVID tyranny as full communism or authoritarianism or totalitarianism? And as always, smash the like button, make sure you're subscribed, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.